When the news broke that Eric Forrester was being forced into retirement, the once glittering corridors of Forrester Creations turned eerily silent. The fashion house that had survived scandal, rivalry, and heartbreak for decades suddenly felt hollow, as if its very heartbeat had been stolen. For years, Eric had been the anchor of the family, a visionary who stitched more than fabric. He stitched together the fragile egos, ambitions, and loyalties of his children. Now, with his resignation imposed rather than chosen, the dynasty trembled. Ridge and Steffi, each fiercely proud and loyal in their own ways, tried to project control. They called emergency meetings, reshuffled departments, and issued public statements meant to reassure investors that Forrester Creations remained strong. Yet behind the veneer of confidence lay a storm neither of them anticipated: the return of Thorne Forrester. Thorne's reappearance was not announced. It was an intrusion. He walked through the lobby one morning as if he had never left, his posture radiating defiance. Years abroad had hardened him. His voice was lower, his eyes colder, his manners stripped of the deference he once showed his older brother. Rumors had always surrounded Thorne, about his bitterness toward Ridge, his resentment of being overshadowed, his need to prove that he too carried their father's genius. But no one expected him to return now, at the exact moment when the empire's foundations were cracking. To some, his timing seemed opportunistic. To others, prophetic. At first, Ridge tried to be diplomatic, welcoming his younger brother with a cautious smile that failed to hide his suspicion. But Thorne wasted no time in declaring his intent. He was there not for reconciliation, but for restoration. In his view, Eric's forced retirement was a betrayal, one orchestrated by Ridge and Steffi to consolidate their control. He claimed that the company's creative spirit had been sacrificed for corporate efficiency, that Forrester Creations had lost its soul to branding and algorithms. "Father built an empire on passion," he said during a heated board meeting, "and you've turned it into a factory." The statement landed like a blow. Ridge, ever the perfectionist and strategist, tried to dismiss Thorne's accusations as emotional theatrics. But deep down, they stung. There had been whispers even among employees that the company's recent designs lacked the magic of Eric's early years. Steffi, standing by her father's side, countered with numbers, profit margins, and press accolades. Yet Thorne wasn't interested in figures. He was after legitimacy, legacy, and revenge. He announced that Eric had once promised a mistake in leadership should he ever return, and he was ready to claim it. The revelation sent shockwaves through the family. Brooke, always caught between her past loves and current loyalties, found herself reliving old wounds. She remembered Thorne's heartbreak when Ridge had taken not only his spotlight but also the woman he loved. To see them now facing off across a boardroom table felt like history twisting the knife. Ridge, furious but constrained, warned Thorne not to disrupt the company during its fragile transition. Thorne, unmoved, countered that it was already disrupted by arrogance, secrecy, and the slow decay of their father's dream. Behind the corporate conflict lurked deeper wounds. Thorne's years abroad had not been peaceful. He had faced bankruptcy, scandal, and personal loss, watching from afar as Ridge's empire flourished. He had buried his pride long enough, but Eric's forced retirement was the final spark. To him, it symbolized everything wrong with the family: loyalty traded for ambition, emotion replaced by power. Now, returning to Los Angeles, he was determined not just to reclaim what was his, but to punish those who had forgotten him. Eric, confined to his home, watched the chaos unfold from a distance. His once steady hands trembled as he read the headlines: Forrester Civil War, Son's Battle for the Throne. He had hoped his departure would bring peace, but instead it ignited the very conflict he had always feared. Stephanie's absence haunted the halls like a ghostly reprimand, her sons tearing apart the legacy she had fought to protect. Though frail, Eric refused to remain silent. He summoned both Ridge and Thorne to his bedside, demanding unity. But unity was no longer possible. The damage had already been done. Ridge's frustration simmered into fury. He accused Thorne of exploiting Eric's vulnerability and the company's instability for personal gain. "You left when things got hard," Ridge spat one night after a tense family dinner. "You don't get to return and play savior." But Thorne's anger was colder, more deliberate. He spoke of years of exile, of ideas dismissed, of designs stolen and credited to others. He reminded Ridge that Forrester creations had been born from collaboration, not dictatorship. "You're not a king," he said. "You're just a tailor who forgot how to listen." The rivalry soon spilled beyond the boardroom. Steffi, fiercely protective of her father's legacy, began a campaign to discredit Thorne's claim. She met with lawyers, investors, and designers, painting Thorne as unstable and out of touch. But her determination only made her seem ruthless, and whispers began circulating that perhaps she, not Ridge, was the true architect of Eric's downfall. Meanwhile, Thorne gained sympathy among longtime employees who still remembered his early designs, his warmth, and his humility. They began to see in him the return of something Forrester Creations had lost, a heartbeat. The tension reached its breaking point during a high-profile fashion gala intended to honor Eric's contributions. Ridge had planned it as a farewell celebration, a moment of grace to preserve the company's image. But Thorne turned it into a battlefield. As flashbulbs sparkled and champagne flowed, he took the stage uninvited, seizing the microphone from the event host. In front of the entire industry, he announced his intention to challenge the leadership structure of Forrester Creations, presenting a signed letter, Eric's old promise of succession, witnessed years earlier by a forgotten associate. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ridge's composure cracked. Steffi's face turned white. In that moment, the glamour of the evening collapsed. Cameras captured every glare, every clenched jaw, every betrayal etched into the family's collective expression. The following morning, headlines declared war. Investors panicked, and the company's stock began to plummet. But for Thorne, it wasn't about money. It was about vindication. He had finally forced his brother to confront the truth, that leadership without integrity was hollow. Brooke found herself caught between them, her emotions a maze of guilt and nostalgia. Ridge still represented her great love, but Thorne reminded her of compassion, of the softer side of the Forresters that had long been buried under ambition. She visited Eric, who confessed that perhaps he had been wrong to pit his children against one another. "I built an empire," he whispered, "but I failed to build peace." His words lingered with her as she tried to mediate, urging both men to remember why Forrester Creations existed, not for ego, but for art. Yet pride has a longer memory than love. Ridge doubled down, unveiling a bold new fashion line designed to reassert his dominance. Thorne retaliated by launching his own rival collection under the revived Forrester Originals label, backed by independent investors. The industry divided. Designers, models, and clients chose sides. Los Angeles became a battlefield of loyalty and legacy. What began as a dispute over leadership evolved into an existential struggle for the family's soul. Through it all, Steffi became the embodiment of the next generation's ruthlessness. Once a visionary like her grandfather, she was now consumed by the need to protect her empire. Her decisions grew colder, her smile sharper. She began using Eric's retirement fund to stabilize the company's finances, an act that both Thorne and Ridge viewed as betrayal. Even Taylor, Steffi's mother, returned to intervene, urging her daughter to remember the values she once cherished. But Steffi had crossed a line. She believed sentiment was weakness, and in a world ruled by perception, weakness was death. Meanwhile, Thorne's rise was not without cost. The pressure, the media attention, and the endless comparisons to Ridge began eroding his sanity. He saw his father's legacy as both a crown and a curse. At night, he dreamed of the atelier filled with laughter, of Stephanie's perfume lingering in the air, of designs that spoke to love instead of competition. But each morning, he woke to headlines depicting him as a usurper, a man desperate for validation. He began to question whether his quest for justice had turned into the very obsession he despised. The final confrontation came on the night of the Forrester shareholders' meeting. The air was thick with anticipation. The boardroom glittered with nervous energy. Eric, weakened but resolute, attended in person, escorted by Brooke. Ridge and Thorne sat across from each other like opposing generals. Documents lay on the table, evidence and counterclaims, all waiting for a verdict that could destroy the family forever. When Eric finally spoke, his voice trembled but carried authority. He revealed that the original succession letter had been authentic, but incomplete. He had intended Thorne to lead alongside Ridge, not against him. The company was meant to be shared, he said. You were meant to balance each other, fire and water, vision and heart. His words silenced the room, but the damage had already been done. Years of resentment couldn't be erased by a confession. In a moment of uncharacteristic vulnerability, Ridge looked at his brother and saw not an enemy, but a reflection of his own loneliness. Thorne, exhausted, finally understood that the throne he sought brought no peace, only ghosts. Forrester creations had devoured them all. Eric wept quietly, realizing that his legacy would not be defined by his designs, but by the fractures within his family. In the months that followed, the company struggled to recover. Ridge and Thorne agreed to a fragile truce, co-leading the brand under Eric's fading guidance. Steffi withdrew from public life, haunted by what ambition had cost her. Brooke remained the quiet glue holding the remnants together, though her heart carried scars from both men. The story of Forrester Creations became more than the tale of fashion and fame. It became a modern tragedy about pride, forgiveness, and the cruel inheritance of power. The world saw a glamorous empire, but inside its walls, the Forresters knew the truth. Every stitch of their legacy was woven with blood, love, and regret. And as Eric's final sketchbook closed, the family was left to wonder whether beauty could ever truly redeem the damage ambition had wrought. Under the veil of grief that lingered over Los Angeles after Luna's tragic death, the city pulsed with whispers. The news of her passing had frozen time for those who loved her, but it was the arrival of a stranger, an elegant, unnervingly calm figure, who reignited the storm. This person claimed to know not only how Luna died, but why. The declaration tore through the quiet halls of Spencer Publications like a blade through silk, awakening buried secrets and rekindling rivalries that had lain dormant for years. Luna's death had seemed accidental, another cruel twist of fate in a life marked by beauty and fragility. Yet as the days unfolded, it became clear that her story did not end in that sterile hospital room. There was something left unfinished, something she had hidden, not about Will or Electra as many had assumed, but about a secret that reached into the very core of the Spencer dynasty. Beneath the surface of grief and speculation, a darker truth waited to emerge. The stranger's presence felt like a haunting echo from Luna's shadowed past, carrying the scent of danger and the weight of unfinished business. No one knew where they came from. Some said they had been watching from a distance. Others swore they had seen the figure near Spencer Publications days before Luna's final breath. What was undeniable was the way they spoke her name, not with grief, but with knowing, like someone who had once stood in the same fire that consumed her. Their revelation began with a single document slipped under the door of Bill Spencer's office. Inside, a note scrawled in Luna's handwriting trembled with urgency. "If anything happens to me, don't believe what you see." Bill, a man hardened by business wars and heartbreak, read those words in silence. His empire had been built on control, but Luna's death shattered that illusion. For the first time, he was staring into chaos that couldn't be managed with power or money. Her note hinted at something far greater than a love affair gone wrong. It suggested sabotage, espionage, and perhaps a betrayal that stretched into the walls of Spencer Publications itself. As Bill retraced Luna's final months, he discovered she had been working on a confidential project within the company, a digital communications system designed to secure their international contracts. What seemed like routine corporate innovation now appeared to be a cover for something else entirely. Luna, brilliant yet underestimated, had stumbled upon a secret network hidden within Spencer's own infrastructure. Encrypted files tied to offshore accounts, anonymous transactions, and coded exchanges between names that should never have appeared together. The deeper Bill dug, the more he realized that Luna's silence before her death was not born of guilt, but of fear. She had been protecting someone or something, and whoever was behind this knew she was getting too close. Meanwhile, Will, still reeling from her loss, found himself haunted not just by grief, but by flashes of memory that didn't add up. He remembered Luna making late-night phone calls, whispering to someone she called the architect. At first, he had assumed it was a client or perhaps a confidant from her modeling days. Now, that name took on a sinister resonance. When the mysterious figure appeared at the edge of Luna's funeral, dressed in black, face partially veiled, it was Will who felt the chill first. They left behind a single white rose and a USB drive wrapped in silk. Inside were voice recordings, Luna's voice, trembling, recounting her discovery that someone inside Spencer Publications was funding a covert operation to manipulate media narratives, targeting rival families like the Forresters and the Maroons. Her last words on the recording were clear. "They think I don't know who they are. But I do. And if I fall, they will too." What followed was a descent into paranoia and revelation. Brooke Logan, who had known both the Spencers and the Forresters longer than anyone, sensed that the old power games had returned under a new disguise. She urged Bill to tread carefully, warning him that Luna's death might be part of something orchestrated far beyond personal vengeance. The patterns in the files were unmistakable: cross-company data leaks, shared investments, and a series of shell corporations tied to names like Deacon Sharp and even Eric Forrester's old holdings. It appeared that Luna had uncovered a multi-generational alliance between families once thought to be enemies, forged in secrecy to control not only fashion but information. Spencer Publications had unknowingly become the vessel for this grand design. As this truth clawed its way into daylight, the stranger's identity finally began to take shape. They were known only as Evelyn, an investigative journalist once presumed dead after exposing corruption within the media empire a decade ago. Evelyn had been Luna's silent mentor, guiding her through encrypted messages and secret meetings. Luna's fascination with ethics in journalism had not been a passing interest. It was part of her rebellion against the manipulation she saw around her, even in the man she loved. Bill had taught her to fight, to protect what was hers, but Luna had chosen a different weapon: truth. Now, that truth had cost her life. Evelyn's reappearance wasn't a coincidence, it was an act of war. She claimed to hold evidence that Luna's death was staged to cover up a corporate coup within Spencer Publications. Someone had wanted control of the company, of the narrative, and of the legacy Bill had spent his life building. Will, caught between loyalty to his father and the ghost of the woman he loved, struggled to trust anyone. The recordings Luna left behind painted a picture of deceit that ran through every floor of the skyscraper bearing their name. The media empire that had once symbolized success was now revealed as a facade of manipulation and blood-stained ambition. As Evelyn continued her crusade, she drew others into the storm. Steffi Forrester, always wary of the Spencers, saw an opportunity to strike. Thomas Forrester offered his design expertise to help decode Luna's files, uncovering messages hidden in visual data patterns, a method of encryption that mirrored fashion design itself, turning beauty into disguise. The revelation sent shockwaves through Los Angeles. What began as the death of one woman had become the unraveling of an entire dynasty. The press turned ravenous. Headlines screamed betrayal, and investors fled. Yet beneath the noise, the question remained: who had pulled the final trigger? Evelyn's theory pointed toward someone within Spencer Publications' boardroom, a ghost shareholder who had been siphoning funds for years under a pseudonym. When the name was finally revealed, it shattered what little stability remained. It wasn't a rival. It was Katie Logan. Bill's former wife had quietly built influence through back channels, using Luna's technology project to expose his unethical deals with media lobbyists. Luna's discovery had made her a liability. Evelyn's evidence showed that the night Luna died, Katie had met with a private investigator to discuss shutting down the project permanently. The confrontation spiraled out of control. Whether the death had been accidental or deliberate was never proven, but the guilt haunted Katie with every breath. She withdrew from public life, leaving Will torn between two impossible loyalties, his mother and the woman he had loved. In the final twist, Evelyn disappeared once more, leaving behind a message for Bill. The truth is not meant to destroy, but to cleanse. Luna died for that truth. What will you do with it now? Bill stood in his office overlooking the city, the skyline shimmering under a gray dawn. For once, he didn't see power or triumph, only ghosts. The empire he had built stood on the edge of collapse, not because of competitors, but because of the silence he had allowed to grow within his walls. Luna's secret, born of courage and love, had become the mirror reflecting every sin he had tried to bury. And as Los Angeles stirred beneath him, whispering the next rumor, the next scandal, Bill understood that Spencer Publications was no longer his to command. It belonged to the truth Luna had died for, and the ghosts who would never let it run.